Welcome to today's video. I'm Richard Chapo. I'm a privacy lawyer in San Diego, California. Today I want to talk about complying with privacy laws, a new approach. At this point, if you run a business online or off, you are probably becoming incredibly frustrated with all the different privacy laws that are being enacted, the rules, the regulations, all the different steps you have to take to comply with these little beasts. It's understandable. Obviously we had the GDPR that kind of kicked this off, the European regulation. And for many companies that were not based in Europe, it was a huge surprise because it represents an entirely different approach to the collection, storage, and usage of personal data than we see in other countries, particularly in the United States, for instance. There's no equivalent. There certainly hasn't been to that point. So in 2018, May 25th, when it went into effect, it was a big wake-up call for a lot of people. However, one of the mistakes that many companies made at that time was assuming the GDPR would be it. And typically when you see some major piece of legislation like that, it's almost predictable that there'll be more coming. And that is what we've seen. Now, Washington, D.C., whatever your politics, I think we can all agree is a bit of a mess. And so we don't have a national privacy law, but we saw the state starting to fill the bucket, if you will, the California Consumer Privacy Act being probably the first big law. Nevada passed an amendment to its privacy laws that also dealt with privacy data issues, but you can see where things were headed. And so the problem was, well, you spent all 2018 trying to get ready for the GDPR. And, a few months go by and then your lawyer calls you up and says, hey, there's this new California privacy law. Oh, and we have these different requirements that now you have to comply with. And this probably aggravated you. And understandably so. I mean, it's just kind of a never ending situation. Well, here's the bad news. There are more coming. There's something like 8 states right now that are fairly close to passing their own individual privacy laws. And the nature of the internet and our digital world is such that if you have people coming to your site, they're probably going to be people coming from those states. Now, California has a 50,000 person carve out. You don't have to comply with it unless you're of a certain size, you're receiving a certain amount of traffic. These other states, some of them don't have any carve out. So if you get one person visiting your site or your app from those states, then technically you're supposed to comply with these new privacy laws. So we have this kind of overall situation where for the next 3 to 5 years, you're just going to be constantly hit with new privacy laws that you're going to have to comply with. And that means new requirements, new steps you're going to have to take. And, you're going to grow to hate your attorney, and you're going to grow to hate the concept of privacy. And it's just a mess. It's a mess. There's really no other way to describe it. And eventually, hopefully, we'll end up with some kind of national privacy law that will at least simplify things. But again, if you look at Washington, D.C., it's probably not coming soon. So you have a fundamental question that you need to consider if you run a business online or off, small or big. And that is, do you take the split your net approach or the grab it all approach? Most companies are now taking the splinter net approach. And by that, what I mean is that they just try to comply with every new law as it comes out. And I would submit that that's inefficient and incredibly frustrating. It will literally start driving you nuts. So is there an alternative? Is there a new approach? And I would call it the grab it all approach. And that is, yes, to step back from your business and to think about, how can you deal with visitor data, with customer data, consumer data, employee data in a manner that is going to revolutionize not only your business, but help it, and at the same time, put you in a position where you are almost automatically complying with whatever privacy law comes out. And so you can kind of see this happening with some big companies that you're familiar with: Apple, Facebook, Google. Okay, Facebook and Google, as we all know, they suck up as much personal data as they can. They categorize it, they monetize it, and they sell it. That is their business model. And up to now, there's been nothing wrong with that. And as you've noticed, it's been a very successful business model based on the size of those companies. Apple, on the other hand, doesn't really take that approach. They instead focus on product sales. And so they're trying to bring you in. They're not really collecting and doing anything sophisticated with your data, certainly not monetizing it on a scale anywhere close to what Facebook and Google do. Their goal is to get you in using their services so they can sell you products. And as you can see from their stock price and their earnings reports, Apple's done very well with that approach. where the privacy law is headed is towards the Apple approach and away from the Google and the Facebook approach. It's just there's such a movement to stop the abuse of personal data by data brokers, by large companies. Um, that it's what you're used to in relation to operating online. That's going to go away. So these concepts in most businesses, you look online, they're incorporating things like email lists, social media channels, some ways to interact with people. And on one hand, that interaction is based on the noble goal of interacting with your customers and informing them on your products and services, customer service, answering the questions, these kinds of things. But there's also a secondary goal where you want that data so you can drip market on them, drip market on them, drip market on them. Again, that's understandable. Will all of that go away completely? No. But the real question, and it's a legitimate question, is will so many limits be put on it that it becomes ineffective? And we're starting to see some of the reactions from the larger companies that suggest that there are going to be problems. So we have Google came out with an announcement, I believe it was in January of 2020, in which they stated that they are doing away with cookies in their own business. So they are not going to use cookies anymore to do individual tracking. Instead, they're looking at some different approaches where they may look at bundled communities. So maybe a geographic community instead of tracking you as an individual. They may say, I don't know how this will work, but this person is located in, Hollywood, California. And so we have this group of people in Hollywood, California, and this group, has these characteristics. And the argument from their perspective is then they're not doing individual tracking. It's more of a group thing. And any, marketing that they would submit in relation to that or any information they would sell to marketers in that area would be based on the group. Now, kind of an odd concept. We'll have to see how it works. But the more important thing to recognize here is that is a complete abandonment of tracking and monetizing personal data for individuals. That concept completely abandons the norm of what you see online these days. And if Google, who is very resistant to these changes, is considering that, and they're planning for this to happen over the next couple of years, that should be telling you something. They have seen the future, and the future is grim for parts of their business model. And I think, behavioral tracking, behavioral monitoring, behavioral profiling, a lot of this is, it's pretty ugly. We already see it with the California Consumer Privacy Act, the concept of do not sell my personal information. And we see ad networks and different ad groups straining to come up with solutions. And quite honestly, most of the solutions I've looked at, they don't make sense. They're trying to claim that they are what are known as limited service providers under these acts. And maybe it holds up in court. I have my doubts. But we'll have to see how it plays out. But here's the problem. Even if that does work, there are other laws coming that are even more restrictive. New York has something called a data fiduciary law that's coming, and will make companies the fiduciary of their users' data. And what that means is you, as the company, must do everything in the interest of the customer and completely ignore your own interest. And if that sounds like a vague yet threatening standard, it is. It would shut down large amounts of marketing online. Facebook has even come out and said point blank, we cannot function in the state of New York if this law passes. So again, the threat is real. So what can you do? What approach could you take that maybe would help you get around all of these privacy laws, or certainly most of them, and would greatly limit your compliance requirements? And the answer, I think, is to really focus on what is personal information and how can you set up a paradigm with your company that excludes it. Remember, all of these laws, the key thing with them is they are all based on the collection of personal information. And then the question is, how do they define personal information? It's pretty broad. They define it in ways such as anything that can directly or indirectly be used to identify a person. Okay. Well, what if you figure out a way to anonymize your data or to encrypt it in such a way that you could never use it to identify a person? Instead, you can use it as Google's thinking. You can use it to identify groups of people, maybe these different approaches. I'm not a data scientist. I don't know how you would do this. You would have to think about it and talk to people. But if you could get to a point where data comes into your site or into your business and there is no way to use it to identify a person. Well, you just complied with about 95% of all the privacy laws out there. You would not have to comply with the California CCPA do not sell my information requirement. You would not have to comply with the GDPR requirement to disclose what personal information you have for a person. Why? Because you don't have any personal information. Yes, you have data, but it no longer falls within the definition of personal information. And so you can't go look at that data and say, okay, Bob Smith, you've requested a copy of whatever information we have for you. The answer is we can't produce any because we don't have any personal information for you. We have data related to you, but we can't use it to identify you. If we have this big data set of, whatever it is, 50,000 terabytes of data, we have no idea which part of this actually applies just specifically to you. And again, reading the definitions of personal information and all of these rules and regulations in these acts, that pretty much excuses you from compliance. And then your next step is, once you've hammered that down and you make sure it absolutely works and you run it through lawyers such as myself and it's all nailed down, then you turn around to your customers and you use that as a unique selling position. You say, hey, there's three of us competitors in this niche, and we all provide this type of service or these goods. And while we think our services or goods are better, we just want to let you know that while they're selling you similar things, they're taking your personal information and selling it off to different companies who are going to use it without you even knowing. We're not. Here's our privacy approach. And it becomes a unique selling position. And what you're seeing with privacy issues is it's a hot topic. And consumers are starting to, be a bit concerned about who's grabbing their data and what they're doing with it. And so if you can position your business like that, you may well find that it helps not only establish your brand, but it helps with actual sales. And again, you see Apple doing this. I have a DVR, so I very rarely watch commercials on TV. Usually tape the show and fast forward through them. But I am aware, and you should go look for them. There are Apple commercials that say the whole pitch is, we don't collect and misuse your data like Google and Facebook, basically. I don't know if they specifically mention those companies, but it's pretty well inferred who they're talking about. And this is their unique selling position. If you look at, the electronics show in Vegas this year, the big issue that was out there wasn't, the magical new AI, toilet or garbage can or whatever, electronics they've come up with. It was privacy. Tons of companies advocating different approaches to privacy. And that's the beauty of our system, of course, with capitalism, is people are going to look, okay, here's a problem. How do we solve it? And they're coming out with privacy approaches. So investigating some of these and seeing if you can use them with your business, to come up with kind of a, as I call it there, grab it all approach, could well be worth your money. It could also be with your mental health, because if you're going to have to comply with every new privacy law that comes out over the next 5 or 6 years, you may go insane. As a privacy lawyer, I'm finding it obnoxious to deal with. It's just ludicrous, and some of the requirements, you wonder what these people are thinking. They're clearly being written by people who've never actually been online, and they've been online, but they don't understand how the internet works. And some of the requirements are just bizarre. I will give you an example. You may well be familiar with the California Consumer Privacy Act. You are supposed to provide California consumers with a do not sell my information form. And so they can go to this form on your website and they can submit their name and their email address and they can opt out. Well, that sounds wonderful, but let me ask you, how many third parties that you deal with, let's say like an Amazon affiliate program, or more importantly, like an ad network, how many of them use the name and address of a person to track them? None. They use cookies or similar technology, pixels, whatever it may be. So when that person submits that form to you with their name and their email address, it's worth squat. You have to come up with some other solution. So you see these ad networks kicking out do not sell my information links and things of that sort to try to deal with it. But you're going to see a lot more of that kind of frustrating language and requirements that don't make a lot of sense. And, for privacy lawyers, this is the glory days. It's, a very exciting time. But for businesses, drive you a little insane. So anyways, I'm not suggesting that there's one particular approach that you should take to this, but you should think about it, because I think if you can come up with a global solution for your business, in relation to privacy, well, you're probably going to save yourself a ton of money in addition to all the other benefits I've already mentioned, because privacy laws are just going to get stranger and weirder as we go along here. So anyways, if you have questions or comments or you want to chat about it, feel free to contact me at SoCalInternetLawyer.com. Otherwise, feel free to leave any comments you have below. If you're on YouTube, if you're watching this somewhere else, again, you can contact me directly at SoCalInternetLawyer.com. And thanks for watching. Have yourself a good one.